Today, I'm not going to do a full setup video on this press. There are several guys on YouTube that have really good in-depth videos. I'll link them in the description below, give you links to the videos that I watched before I set this up. After watching their videos, I barely had to even look at the owner's manual at all. The only reason I looked at it was for setting this powder dispensing system, and as you'll see, this thing is super simple and works really well. What we're going to do today, I'm just going to show you each operation of the press and how the Hornady lock and load press does it. I'll show you the priming system, the powder dispensing, and we'll go through the automatic ratcheting indexing system and how that works. There's only one tweak that I've done to this press that I didn't see covered by videos, and I will talk about that in a little bit, and it has to do with getting the priming system lined up so that the shuttle on the priming tray doesn't get caught up and it actually feeds primer smoothly. Right, so I'm going to grab the camera and walk with you here through each operation of the press, and then I'll just go and load up probably 50 or so rounds and let you guys see if I need to make any adjustments along the way, and we'll talk about some of the adjustments I've already made. All right, gonna freehand the camera here just a little bit to show you guys what's going on, and we'll look at it from the top down. Here is the powder dispensing system. It is almost identical to the powder dispenser here that I use to throw by hand. The only difference is it looks like they've changed the plastic a little bit. This is kind of a cloudy plastic, and it's got some, you can probably see that texture on there. And this one over here is clear. Other than that, I haven't found any differences between them. They use the same pistol and rifle rotor metering system in here, and the lock and load AP actually comes with both rotors that you need, unlike when you just buy it separately and have to buy, I believe, the pistol rotor separately. So that's powder. The dies, as I already mentioned, are the lock and load system. So let me pop one out here. Again, you guys are probably already familiar with this, but you adjust your die one time, of course, for each press. This isn't going to be able to drop directly into this press and have the adjustment correct. Now, it may be, I haven't tested, but that's not how it's set up. The press heads are not identical between the two, so you will have to adjust it separately if, say, you wanted to go use this die on single stage. But once you have it set to this press and you're putting it back in the same station, you can just drop it in, turn it that 1/8 of a turn, and you're all set to go. This should make it fairly easy to switch between calibers. This shell plate is the other thing that you're going to change, and you just use this big old wrench, loosen it up, and it pops right off. You swap the next one on, and you're good to go. One thing you do have to do when you take the shell plate on and off is uninstall and reinstall this case retention spring. And that is super easy. It just slips right around. The spring does dip down into a slot right in here so that you can feed a case straight on. So you couldn't do that over here because the spring is in the way. But right here you can just slip the case straight in, because the subplate actually guides that spring into a channel and keeps it down there so that the cases can freely slide in. And you'll see that it doesn't really hang up. It actually works pretty slick. So that's all you got to do when you want to switch calibers. I have not loaded anything on this press besides 9mm yet. I know that there will be some switching to do with the internals of the powder metering system when switching back and forth between pistol and rifle cases, but I haven't done that yet actually, so I'm not going to talk about it in this video. So we've talked about the powder measure, the die system. Let's go over the priming system. My reloading bench is clean. Forgive my messy workbench down there that is kind of a catch-all right now. So this priming system is a pickup tube type. This is the one for small primers. And you just push this tube down over the top of the primer to pick it up. We'll do that in a few minutes here. So you've got the pickup tube, then we'll look up here to the top. You've got a follower rod, which I need to put a piece of tape on so that it doesn't go down too far. You got a little retaining cap here. This is the actual primer tube, and the beveled end goes down. And then this is the blast shield, and it screws into this cap right down here that rides over the shuttle. I'm going to pull this out of the way for a minute so that we can get a better look at how the priming shuttle works. All right, here is a close-up of the priming system. You can see we're at the back of the shell plate. This right here is the rear support of the press. So when I raise the handle, I'll try to follow this. When I raise the handle, the shuttle itself, which is right under here, you can see it moving back and forth there, rides along this guide wire. And when it hits the bend in the guide wire, it's drawn rearward. And you can see there we're at the top. And then it goes back down. The primers feed, of course, through the top there. And you can see right here is the hole for the primer. That hole drops under here and picks up a primer as it comes back and then takes it forward. You may have to adjust this. We're at the top of the press now, right beside the dies. This little plastic piece right here that's held into the press and Allen bolt here can ride in a slot and move back and forth here. It can also twist side to side, and that side to side adjustment is what I had to do to make the priming system run smoothly. Let me show you the only single downside I've seen to this entire press so far, and it is in this adjustment arm. All right, so let's take a look at this a little bit. Let me raise this ram all the way to the top, just for sake of being able to see what I'm talking about. This press ram right here does have a little bit of play back and forth. And how I'm getting this to move back and forth is just pushing side to side on the handle, and it's twisting back and forth. What will happen if you're up here and this is not adjusted, when you go to come down, there I got it to do it. I'm pressing to the side, it'll hang up and not want to slide in there. I think I can buff this shuttle right here and get it to work a little bit better. Maybe make it not hang up, but you'll see if I don't press side to side on the handle, it goes in just like it should. So if I give a little torque, in this case it's to the left on the handle, when I go down, it binds up right there. So I was having to watch that while running the press, but when you're standing over to the side, because you're feeding brass and bullets in from this side, you tend to put just a little bit of force in the other direction anyway, just because of how the handle is. And I've actually, since I adjusted this to the side as far as I could get it, I've not had any issue with that at all. And again, I think if, as has been pointed out on some other YouTube videos, if I take this shuttle out and polish the bottom, it might not even hang up right there. So that is the only gripe I have so far about this system. Otherwise, it seems to be really well done. We haven't talked about the actual primer seating yet, so let me show you that. What I'm going to do is put the actual primer tube down in here, and let's single feed one primer into this system so you can see how it works. All right, so I have one primer in here, and you can see that that picked up a primer. Nope, it did not pick up a primer. Oh, let me get the follower on top of it. Okay, and you can see that that plate indexes a half turn as it goes up to go into the dies. There's the primer. Okay, I went super slow there. There it clicked in. I went super slow on the way down, so it didn't click in. Again, I just need to polish the bottom of that. But you can see that it positioned the primer directly in the center of the shell holder there. Then when I push forward on the ram, that primer will come up and seat into the pocket. And I've found so far that it is a very smooth, nice priming motion. Let me run a case in here so that you can get a view of that priming motion. Okay, it's in the sizing die now. We'll rotate over, and now it's in position over the primer. And I'm just going to push forward on this ram. That's all it took. It went in super nice and smoothly and got a nice primer seat. When I was getting used to this, one thing I did notice is that I was getting my primers just a little bit high. Now this one's perfect, but you do have to push all the way forward on the shell holder until the until you actually bottom out on the priming ram right here. Let me show you the underside of the press and what's going on with this. All right, so we're not looking at the underside of the press so much as the underside of the ram itself. Right here is where we're looking. This, under the subplate, so here's our shell plate, and we're in the all the way up position again. So here's our shell plate, our subplate, the actual press ram, and here is the priming ram. That is a 7/16 hex. That will unscrew, and you switch this out between small and large primers. When that comes down, that actually hits the body of the press itself right there. And when you press forward on the handle, it lowers the shell plate a little bit more, raising the priming ram. There is a good stiff spring in there, and it seems to work really well just like that. One thing I have seen some folks complain about is that this leaves a little bit of a dent right here in the press itself. From what I've heard from other guys' videos, this little dent here is self-limiting. Once there gets to be enough of a contact patch from the underside of that priming ram, this won't get any bigger, and honestly, I'm not really worried about it. All right, so what just happened, and you might have heard it, but the camera wasn't in a position where you could see it. Because I have, and I'm going to pull it out now, I had this follower down the tube, and there were no primers. It caught in the primer hole in the slide, and actually caused the whole priming system to fall apart. So here is the, let me raise this up a little bit. Here is the guide wire. I'm going to pull that out. It fell down. And the priming shuttle. It hasn't hurt these parts at all. At least it hasn't for me yet, and I'm really hoping it doesn't. And I'm going to pop the camera again so you can see. This guide wire, and you might have seen it before, rests in this little spring-loaded cup. In my opinion, this spring is not strong enough. There's just a rounded end of that guide wire that sticks into it, and it pops in to that plastic piece we were talking about earlier, right up there. Now, of course, I'm on the wrong side of the shuttle, but I'll get that sorted out in just a second here. So this guide wire just goes down on the inside of that slide, sits in that pocket, and then snaps into this plastic piece up here that we were talking about earlier, and rides just like that. And shouldn't get hung up as long as I don't have the primer follower. Actually, let me put this down. See, if I have that primer follower up there, you can see it binds that up and knocks it all out of line. There we go. So that is what it is, but once you get used to it, you really don't have any problems at all. Let me put this whole assembly back together here. That is the priming system. Let's take a quick look at the indexing of the shell plate and the initial problems you might encounter with that. Again, this has been covered on other YouTube videos, so I'm just going to go over it very briefly. Of course, if you want to have any hope of this indexing correctly, you got to have this bolt tight. And you can see it's actually a little loose here, so I will give that a little bit of a snug. The shell plate will just turn when you have that on, so I am going to have to hold the shell plate a little bit. But I'm just going to give that a little bit of a snug, and that will do the job just fine. All right, so where we're looking is all the way down the ram. I'm going to raise it up here. At the very bottom of the ram, you'll be able to see the indexing system that connects to the shell plate. What we have here, and forgive me if I use the wrong mechanical terminology, we've got a spring-loaded pawl on each side here with a slanted face to it that's going in different directions. A lot of the clicking you hear when this press goes up and down are actually these moving. These are adjustable. They've got little Allen screws right there that will adjust their depth, and what that adjusts is how far the travel is on that spinning piece up there. That's hard to see. Let me try it like this. So you can see when I come up, we'll get a half a rotation, and then when I come back down, the opposite side one, this one over here, will grab and rotate it the other half a rotation. This was just a little out of adjustment when I got it. All I needed to do to fix it was back out this screw just a little bit. This came out and made it so that my shell plate clicked into perfect position every time. It was getting hung up like right there and not actually clicking all the way in. All I needed to do was adjust the depth of those little pawls, and it worked out just perfectly. So at the beginning I talked about the powder system. We'll look at that a little more in depth with an actual case now. So I'll take that case that we primed up just a minute ago, and I'll slip it in the priming station here and raise it up. Again, it'll turn at that half turn, and we're going to go into the flaring die. And that's just how I have this set up. I don't have a powder through expander in this, which you can put in. I think that part is available right now, and it's only 10 bucks. I'll probably pick that up. But I don't have that in there right now. So when we go down, we'll click down, and of course there'll be a cartridge in that next station, so I'll press forward to prime, then come back up, and we go into the powder die. The case actuates this whole system, so it'll press up, and it lifts this arm and the whole rotor on the priming system. Then when I put the arm down, it comes back down. It resets at the bottom here, and there is a return spring right here to help it. I accidentally left this return spring off at one point while I was messing around with it. It didn't hurt anything, but I'm guessing it is better to have it on there. All right, so we have a charged case in this station now. So I'm going to pop this out and measure it. 5.1 grains is what I had it set at last night. We got 5.2 there. That's plus or minus a tenth. Let me go ahead and throw another charge. I did that last throw very slowly, so it might not be very representative. We got 10.3, so that did throw a 5.1 grain charge. I will show you guys at some point how I go and dial in a precise charge when it's so low, and this is part of it. I'll throw several so that the little differences end up adding up, and I can see we're still only that 1/10 off. We should be at 15.3. We're at 15.4 because we started a tenth higher. Anyway, if you want me to do a full video on that sometime, I will, but we're not going to get into that right now. Right now, I'm going to consider this set up and ready to go. Dump that powder back in the measure. And I believe we are ready to get to full progressive loading. I'm going to set my primed case aside. I'll load that later. But we're just going to go with some... I'll grab a handful of brass here. And some of this has been sized before cleaning, some of it hasn't, so we've got a mix of it there. I'll mention briefly my components. That is CFE pistol powder in the hopper, CCI 500 primers, and I'm using the Extreme 124 grain plated bullet. Forgive the glare off that white box. As always, do not take my load data as your own unless you work up your own load first and know what you're doing. I am not responsible for any of your loading decisions. That is all on you. Okay, let's run some through here. I haven't loaded the priming system yet. Let me do that. So when I first was loading the pickup tube, I was dumping primers out of here into a flip tray. This is actually from my Hornady hand primer. Then flipping them back over into here so they were oriented correctly. What I then realized is, at least in these CCI trays, they're already flipped the way you want them right now to pick them up. And there's actually enough room in this tray to pick up the primers. So that's what you want to do. Oh, I missed one there. Let's just load in about 10. We'll go for 20 right now. Okay, so there was 20 primers picked up in a hurry. You'll see that there are about 3 locked in this little pickup area. I don't usually want to touch this with my finger, especially since it's oily from running the press. So I'm just going to grab this fiberglass follower rod, not a metal one, and just gently help those in the rest of the way. Okay. So though they're in there, you can feel them rolling around. So I'm going to now flip this over, making sure my cotter key is in place. All right, and it's going to be hard to see with all the junk in the background. We are looking at this tube right here. This is the top of the primer tube. So I'm going to position my pickup tube over here, pull the cotter key, and wiggle it around a little bit so that it lines up, and you heard all those primers slide down. I was a little skeptical of how well that would work at first, but I have not had a single issue with that system. I haven't got anything turned sideways or anything. Now we'll run through a complete cycle of the press just with one case. And this particular case has already been sized, so it'll go up into the sizing die very easily. Since there's no expander ball on pistol cases, I'm not as worried about overworking the brass by sizing it twice. 9mm brass doesn't get sized all that much anyway. So we've gone up into the sizer die. We're now down over the priming station, so I'll push forward. All right, and I didn't pick up a primer there. Let me, I forgot my follower rod again. All right, so I've put my follower rod on now, and I'm sure we'll pick up a primer now. We'll put that back in station 1, run it up into the sizing die. Let me check. No, we did not pick up a primer. Where are we out of line? Now's as good a time as any to come over, and we will get this priming arm adjusted so that it's dropping a primer. All right, when I was showing you guys the components of the priming system, I evidently knocked it out of adjustment just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is raise the ram all the way to the top. I did not hear a primer drop in there. This bolt right here is the one I want to loosen. All right. And there, Highboy 76 or 76 Highboy, I can't remember how he puts his YouTube handle, has a very good explanation about how to adjust this. I do it just a little bit differently. It seems to work just as well. I'm just going to press this directly back until I hear a primer drop in. All right, let me tighten that down. That probably didn't pick up on the camera for you guys. Tell you what, I'm gonna have to put a washer on this screw here because I keep smushing down the plastic. And I don't really want to do that. Alright guys, I did have to jump off camera for a minute to put in that washer because, as I'll put a picture up here, this plastic piece, I'd already tightened it too much because it does want to move around on you. So putting that washer in, let it snug up nice. I don't want to strip out this press. I think it's cast aluminum. I could be wrong. I don't want to strip out that hole, so I did not snug it super tight, but it's tight enough that this plastic bit should not move around. So let's see if that did the job. You can see I do have a primer there in the press. We'll run a shell through. Okay, there, I'm primed. I'm gonna pull that back out. We'll come up. And then down, and I still need to adjust it. But now that that washer is there, I should be able to do that pretty easily. So let me get back to showing you what I was showing you. All right, so here's how we're gonna do that. I'm gonna raise up the ram, bring it back. I did not hear a primer fall. So I'm gonna hold this in place, loosen it, and then slide this whole bit forward until I hear a primer fall, and then just a tiny bit more, not that much more. Tiny bit more. Because of how boogered up that piece of plastic is, it's being a pain. All right, let's go right there and give that a try. Before, when I was snugging up this bolt, and I apologize, it's kind of hard to see because of this primer tube in the way. But when I was snugging up this bolt here, it would want to sink back into where it was before, and it actually pulled this whole plastic bit back and negated the adjustment that I had just made. All right, let's give it a little snug there and try her again. All right, so I should have a primer on this time, and I do. We'll prime the case, and I'll pull it out so that we can make sure it feeds. And it did. We've got a primer in there. So let's go ahead and get you guys on the other side of the press, and we'll do some loading. I'll slide a case into the first station. We'll just load one round this time. Get it primed, flared, and I'm going to push down every time to keep doing it, okay? Powder. And I'll grab a bullet here. And I'm going to stick it into my flared case. Then I'll come around and up, seat the bullet. Okay, and then we've got one more station we're not using this time. And it drops out into our completed cartridge bin. And there we have one completed cartridge. I will tell you guys, I already do have the seating die set up to where I want to seat this bullet. And let's check it. Sure enough, we've got a good cartridge that matches up with the case gauge. Drops right in, drops right out. One good completed cartridge. All right, let us take the rest of this pile of brass here, and let's go ahead and spin up the press. Prime on the downstroke. Okay, now I need to start putting a piece of brass on and a bullet, which I have been following up into the bullet seating die just out of habit. And now we'll get one completed cartridge dropping out with each stroke. So, brass, bullet, and you might be able to hear, let me check that to make sure it primed. I do that once in a while, just to be sure, and it did. brass, bullet, brass, bullet. Now I will admit, when I first set this up, I had a little bit hard of I had a bit of a time remembering to put the piece of brass on and to push down at the bottom of the stroke to prime the case that was in that station. But now it's just natural after only loading about 200 rounds, so that's good. All right. Let's swap to the other side of the press and look at it from a little bit different angle. And we'll watch from right here for a second. Probably need to get my flare just a little bit more. But you can see that now that I've got my priming system readjusted, I'm not having any trouble, not a single hang up so far. I've only got a couple primers here left, and then we'll run down the press. And you might have heard a little ting here. My fiberglass rod dropped into the primer slot, so we're going to pull that out so it doesn't get caught. And I'm out of primer, so I'll pop that case out, and we'll just run the press down. All right. We'll take a quick look at that powder actuation while I'm running things, and we'll go ahead and load our already charged case or our already primed cases by just sticking them in the shell holder at the location of the priming station. Then we'll flare, powder, seat bullet. One really nice thing about this press is how easy it is to get your cartridge into the shell plate at any station because of this little spring. I got it at an index there. All you got to do is catch the spring with the rim of the case and pop it in there. It's that simple. And then that spring holds your shell in, and it's always sitting in exactly the right spot. You can see that priming ram went right up into the case with no trouble there because it was exactly centered, and this does that very well. So we'll run these through, and I'll show you the action of the powder system. Now, since we're not sizing, this is going to take very little effort on the press. All right, and there you have it. Thinking back over what we've said about the press, I think the only thing I forgot to mention is where the spent primers go. Directly under the sizing die. And when the shell is rotated in that position, you might be able to see there's a hole there. That hole is connected to a brass tube that comes all the way down through the press and attaches at the bottom to a plastic tube that leads into a spent primer catch bottle here. And you could probably fit several thousand in this bottle before it got full. It's a decent size there. Probably, I'd guess it at maybe like 8 or 10 ounces if you were filling it with water. But filling it with primers, it's going to take a long time to fill that up. We loaded what should have been 20 rounds right there so far. I'm going to leave you guys at kind of a wide angle, and I'm going to run through 30 more rounds and see if we have any hiccups. And we'll do this whole process starting with the primer pickup. That should be 30 primers. So I'll just go ahead and gently pop them up into the tube. Load my press primer tube. Drop this down. And again, I said before, I have made a mark. I've made a mark on there so that I know when I'm out of primers. I need to put a piece of tape right on there so that it actually won't drop down into the tube any further and get all jammed up like it can when it gets empty and throw parts. I really don't like that. All right, and we'll just go through this. As I said before, at the beginning of the video, I will, oops, there I tried to put a bullet in the brass slot. I will be eventually setting this press up with a brass feeding system. However, it is not going to be the commercial one from Hornady. That is just way too expensive, like $500 for the brass feeding system, which is absolutely bonkers. Make sure I got that last case primed. Yep, I did. I've got it in my muscle memory now to push forward for the priming. Now I'm off. Putting the bullet before the brass. But I've found several guys doing 3D printed ones that do resemble the Lee Loadmaster priming system, except they're supposed to work. So they just have the drop tubes that you rotate and fill, and they seem to work. There's also a bullet feeding system that you can just use a bullet feeding die and load up a tube. We might do that as well. Just depends on how far into it we get. But that brass feeding system will speed this up quite a bit because I won't have to place the brass and the bullet with each pull of the handle. I'll be able to just place the, I'm gonna check this primer. Yep, it went in fine. Sometimes just because of the differences in brass, the primer seating feels different, so I just like to check. This press does have pretty good feel on the priming, despite you having all kinds of distance between the handle going all the way down through the press and all that, but it seems to have a pretty decent feel. I can definitely tell the difference between different primer pockets. Hopefully I finished my last thought there. Oh, you know what I should do? I'll take another check of my powder weight. I'm sure it's perfectly fine. Yep, that one threw 5 grains, which is fine. That's well within the margin of error. and a tenth or two is just fine with me for variation. This is a light load anyway. Running a 124 grain bullet at about 1050 out of my 4-inch barrel. So grab some more here. So it is a pretty light load. I always want to grab that bullet, and it's just a habit. All right, looks like we are on our last primer, I believe. Actually, we may be out. Yeah, we're out of primers. So I'll take that case out and we'll just run the press down. Yes, indeed, we were out. All right, there we have it. 50 rounds loaded up. And you can see after I got my priming system tuned in, after I had taken it apart to show you guys, everything worked flawlessly. I did not have a single hiccup loading 50 rounds, and it was pretty much trouble-free. During that first 50 rounds that I loaded with this press, I was toying with it and getting things loaded in. The next 150 went perfectly. This 50 went perfectly. I have got, oh, let's see. I've got about 45 primers left in this tray. After I shut off this video, I'm just going to finish off that tray of primers so I can have this 9mm loaded up and ready to go. Guys, hopefully that is a suitable introduction to the Hornady Lock and Load AP, the auto progressive press. You can tell so far I am really impressed with it. It only has that one tiny little glitch with the priming system that has to be adjusted out. Otherwise, this thing has ran flawless for me, and I could not be more happy with my purchase. Again, guys, this was just kind of an introductory video, not meant to be really in-depth. Probably went a little longer than I originally planned it, but I hope I was able to show you guys the mechanical function of each one of the parts of this press so that you can get an idea of how it works and maybe see if it's the system for you. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. Make sure you go and follow the channel on Instagram, jump over to Patreon, and give some support over there. I would really appreciate even $1 a month or whatever level you want to chip in at. Will definitely help with the bullet and testing budget, and I'll be able to get a little bit more to test specifically for the channel, stuff that I maybe wouldn't do if it was just for my own use. So anyway, guys, thanks again for watching, and y'all have a good one.